The rain had started without warning, tapping softly at first and then faster against the wide living room windows, as if the evening itself was restless, and inside the house Laura sat still on the couch with a folded blanket resting on her lap, not really cold but needing something to hold, while the television glowed in front of her with a paused image from an old romantic movie that showed two young people smiling at each other near the ocean, their happiness frozen in time, and the room felt quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful but heavy, filled with things unsaid, when Emma, her 12-year-old daughter, shifted beside her and let out a small sigh that carried more curiosity than complaint, then looked up at her mother and asked, "Mom, why are we watching this?" "Dad will be back soon," and the words landed gently but deeply, because they were true, and yet they touched something Laura hadn't expected to feel so strongly, as she kept her eyes on the screen for a moment longer, noticing how the light reflected off the glass and how familiar the scene felt, reminding her of another time when life had been simpler and emotions had been easier to name, and she thought about Michael, her husband, away on a business trip to Vancouver, only 3 weeks gone. But somehow feeling much farther than that, as if the space between them was not just measured in miles but in moments missed and conversations shortened by busy schedules, and Laura realized she hadn't answered Emma yet, so she finally turned and smiled softly, a practiced smile that mothers learn, warm enough to reassure but careful enough to hide the truth beneath it, and said she just felt like watching something calm tonight, though even as she spoke she knew the movie was not calm at all. It was full of feeling, full of longing, full of people saying what they meant before it was too late, and Emma nodded but did not look convinced, her eyes thoughtful as she glanced back at the screen and then around the room where Michael's absence showed in small ways, like the empty chair near the window and the quiet phone on the table that hadn't buzzed in hours, and Laura pressed play, letting the movie move forward as the music filled the room, but her mind didn't stay with the story on the screen, instead drifting to memories of her own past, to evenings when she and Michael had sat in their first apartment in Seattle with takeout boxes on the floor and big dreams spoken out loud, when love had felt urgent and new and they had believed time would always make room for them, and as the movie characters laughed and argued and reached for each other, Laura felt a gentle ache build in her chest, not because she wanted something forbidden or wrong, but because she missed being seen so clearly, missed the way Michael used to look at her when the world was quiet, and beside her Emma shifted again, sensing the change even if she couldn't name it, and Laura placed a hand over her daughter's, grounding herself in the present, reminding herself of what she had built, of the life that was real and steady, yet the feeling did not fade, it only softened into something deeper, something thoughtful, and she wondered when love became something people carried silently instead of speaking aloud. And as the rain continued outside and the movie played on, Laura realized that this evening was not about passing time until Michael returned, but about facing the truth that waiting could sometimes reveal feelings long ignored, and though nothing dramatic happened in that moment, no arguments or tears or big decisions, the quiet itself became important, because it held the beginning of a question Laura had not yet dared to ask herself, a question about closeness, about distance, and about whether love, even when strong, still needed to be chosen again and again, especially on nights when someone was away and the screen showed a reminder of who you once were and who you still hoped to be. The movie kept playing but Laura barely noticed the scenes changing, because her thoughts had already slipped into the past, moving fast and clear, pulling her back to the early years of her marriage when life had felt open and unfinished, when she and Michael were younger and living in a small apartment in Seattle where the walls were thin, the furniture was second-hand, and every plan felt possible, and she remembered how they used to sit on the floor with coffee mugs between them, talking late into the night about where they would travel, how many children they might have, and what kind of people they wanted to become, and those memories came quickly now, one after another, not slow or heavy, but sharp and bright, because the movie's soft music and gentle voices seemed to unlock them, and Laura felt both comforted and unsettled by how easily she could still feel that version of herself, the woman who laughed without thinking and spoke her feelings without fear, and as the rain outside grew louder, she noticed Emma watching her instead of the screen, studying her face with quiet attention, as if sensing that her mother was far away even though she was sitting right there. And when Emma finally spoke and asked if she missed Dad, the question was simple but honest, and Laura answered just as simply, saying yes, because there was no reason to hide it, and in that moment she understood that missing someone could exist alongside love, not against it, And the movie on the screen showed a couple arguing over small things, their emotions spilling out without control, and Laura realized how rare it had become for her and Michael to argue at all, not because everything was perfect, but because they had both learned to stay calm, to keep the peace, to let certain words remain unsaid, and she wondered when silence had replaced passion, when comfort had slowly pushed aside curiosity, and as the movie reached a quiet emotional moment, Laura felt a sudden urge to call Michael, not to complain or ask questions, but just to hear his voice and tell him she was thinking about him, yet she hesitated, knowing he was busy, knowing she had made that choice many times before, and instead she picked up her phone, looked at his name on the screensaver photo, smiled sadly, and placed it back on the table, choosing patience over impulse, while Emma leaned back against the couch and rested her head on Laura's arm, trusting, calm, unaware of the small emotional storm inside her mother, and Laura gently wrapped her arm around her daughter, feeling grounded again by the weight of that responsibility and love, and as the movie moved toward its ending, Laura felt a quiet shift inside herself, not a decision, but an awareness, a realization that love was not only about staying, but about paying attention, about noticing when something needed care before it faded into habit, and the rain outside slowly eased, leaving the world washed and still, and Laura knew that this evening, simple as it seemed, had changed something important, because it had reminded her that her feelings mattered too, that longing did not mean disloyalty, and that even strong relationships needed moments of reflection, especially when distance made the heart speak louder than routine ever could. The movie ended quietly with soft music fading into silence, and as the screen went dark Emma stretched, smiled, and announced she was tired before giving her mother a long, warm hug that felt more meaningful than usual, telling her that Dad loved her and would be home soon, and after her footsteps disappeared down the hallway, the house returned to its familiar stillness, but this time the silence felt different, less heavy and more thoughtful, as Laura remained on the couch staring at the blank screen, replaying the evening in her mind and realizing how much she had been carrying without speaking, when suddenly her phone buzzed on the table, breaking the quiet in a way that made her heart jump, and when she saw Michael's name her breath caught because the timing felt almost unreal, as if he had sensed her thoughts from miles away. And she answered immediately, hearing his voice sound tired but gentle, familiar and comforting, and he told her he couldn't sleep and had been thinking about her, which made Laura smile even as emotion tightened her throat, and she told him about the movie, about how it reminded her of them when they were younger, and instead of brushing it off he laughed softly and remembered the same details she did, how she always cried at the ending and how they used to argue about the characters afterward, and the conversation moved quickly but deeply, touching places they hadn't visited in a long time, as Michael admitted the trip had made him realize how much he missed home, not just the house but her presence, her voice in the morning, the quiet comfort of being together without needing plans, and Laura felt a warmth spread through her chest because this was what she had been longing for, not drama or change, but connection, and she confessed that the distance had made her think too, made her realize how easy it was to forget to talk about feelings when life stayed busy, and there was a pause on the line, not uncomfortable but full, and then Michael said he would be home the next night and that he didn't want them to drift into silence again, that he wanted to choose them every day, and Laura closed her eyes, letting the words sink in, feeling both relief and hope rise together, and she told him she felt the same, that she wanted to be more present, more open, more honest about what she needed, and as they said goodnight the house no longer felt empty, because the space was now filled with expectation, with the promise of a conversation that would continue in person, and after the call Laura sat there for a moment longer, breathing deeply, aware that nothing dramatic had happened, no arguments or apologies, yet something important had shifted, because they had reached each other again across the distance, and as she finally turned off the TV and lights, heading toward her bedroom, she felt calm in a way she hadn't all evening, knowing that sometimes love doesn't need fixing, it just needs listening, and tonight, at last, they had both listened. Morning arrived gently, sunlight spreading across the kitchen floor as Laura moved through the house with quiet energy, making coffee, opening the windows, and letting fresh air replace the heaviness of the night before, and she noticed how different everything felt even though nothing around her had changed, because inside her there was a sense of clarity and calm, the kind that comes after finally understanding something important, and when Emma walked in rubbing her eyes and asking about breakfast, Laura smiled and told her that Dad would be home that evening, and the news instantly lifted the mood, filling the kitchen with excitement as Emma talked about things she wanted to show him and stories she planned to tell, and Laura listened while setting the table, feeling grateful for the simple rhythm of family life, and throughout the day she moved with purpose, finishing small tasks, answering emails, and thinking about the evening ahead, not with nervousness but with intention, knowing this reunion would not be about grand gestures or dramatic promises, but about attention, honesty, and choosing closeness again. And as afternoon turned to evening, the house slowly prepared itself, lights turned on, dinner warming on the stove, and when Michael finally arrived the moment was quiet and real, marked by a warm embrace at the door and shared smiles that said more than words. And later, after Emma went to her room, Laura and Michael sat together talking openly, sharing how distance had reminded them of what mattered, how routines had slowly taken over, and how easy it was to forget to check in with each other emotionally. And instead of blame there was understanding, instead of silence there was listening. And as the night settled around them, Laura felt steady and hopeful, realizing that love was not about constant excitement but about care, about showing up even when life felt ordinary. And as she finally went to bed, she understood that watching that movie had never been about escaping her life, but about remembering its value, about recognizing that love could grow quiet without disappearing, and that choosing it again, in small and honest ways, was what truly kept it alive.